You ever do something you know is stupid while you're doing it, but you still keep going, like your brain is screaming at you but your body doesn't care? That was me 2 weeks ago, standing in the middle of an overgrown pine forest with a flashlight, a crumpled old map, and no cell signal. The sun had just dipped behind the trees. I could already feel the cold bleeding up through my boots. I wasn't out there by accident. I was following a lead from this weird old man I met at a bar near Fort Shaw. He was drunk, slurring mostly, but when I mentioned I liked exploring old Cold War relics, he got real quiet. Then he scribbled something on a napkin. Said it was a location the military erased from maps back in the 70s. A private bunker. Not government. Not Russian. Not right, he muttered. You find it, you leave it alone. You hear me? Naturally, I didn't listen. The map he gave me was rough, just hand-drawn marks over topographic lines. But sure enough, when I lined it up with an old forestry survey, I found a clearing that didn't show up on Google Earth. No trails. No satellite data. Just a blank spot in the woods. Getting there took half a day of hiking. I had to ditch my truck at a fire road and bushwhack through dense undergrowth. I was expecting maybe the remains of a concrete slab or an old ventilation pipe sticking out of the ground. What I found was different. The clearing was unnaturally quiet. No wind. No insects. Just dead leaves and the faint crunch of my own boots. In the center was a round iron hatch, half sunk in the dirt, rimmed with rust and bolted shut. It didn't have any markings except a strange triangular symbol etched into the metal. Not military. Not anything I recognized. But the weirdest part? As I brushed the leaves away and knelt down to get a better look, I swear, I heard something. A voice. Faint. From below. Just one word. Hello? I froze, hands still on the rim of the hatch, heart thudding in my throat. At first, I thought it had to be the wind, or maybe my imagination screwing with me after too many hours alone in the woods. But then I heard it again. Muffled. Tinny. Like it was coming through an intercom with a dying battery. Hello? Is someone there? Please. The voice sounded weak. Panicked. And human. Against all instinct, I leaned in closer, ear hovering just above the metal. Hello? I called back. Who is this? Static. Then, help me. I stumbled backward, heart racing. I looked around the clearing, suddenly hyper-aware of how far I was from anything resembling safety. No cell signal. No roads. No one would hear me scream, and no one would find me if I disappeared. But I couldn't just walk away. Not with someone calling for help. The hatch was locked with a thick iron wheel and a series of rusted bolts, but the metal had corroded enough to give me hope. I pulled a small pry bar from my pack, standard gear for exploring old structures, and wedged it under the wheel. It took everything I had, straining against decades of rust and grime, until finally the wheel screeched and turned with a loud groan. The bolts slid out with a reluctant clunk. The hatch popped slightly open, exhaling a breath of stale, freezing air that smelled like mildew and rust and something else, something sour. I hesitated. That smell hit a primal nerve. It reminded me of an old meat freezer my uncle had on his farm, the one that broke for a week in August while it was still full. I should have walked away. But I lifted the hatch. The cold air poured out stronger now, and with it, the smell. I shone my flashlight down. A narrow metal ladder descended into total blackness. No sound. No more voices. Just the creak of old iron and the low hum of something electric. I called down again. Nothing. I could have gone back to camp. Left it for someone with authority. But the truth is, part of me wanted to see what was inside. I'm not proud of it. Curiosity can be a curse. I clipped a carabiner to the rim of the hatch and started down. The further I descended, the colder it got. Each rung was slick with condensation, and the air tasted like pennies and mold. After what felt like 30 or 40 feet, my boots hit concrete. I turned in a slow circle with the flashlight, heart pounding. The bunker stretched out in both directions, narrow hallways lined with old wiring, faded signs in English, and doors made of thick steel. The kind that were meant to keep something in. And then I saw it. On the wall, scratched into the paint, were 4 words that stopped me cold. Don't listen to it. That message, don't listen to it, looked like it had been carved in a hurry. The letters were jagged, uneven, some overlapping like whoever wrote them couldn't keep their hands steady. I stared at it, my breath fogging in the beam of the flashlight. My ears strained in the silence, listening for anything. But there was nothing. No voice. No hum of machinery. Not even the groan of shifting pipes or echoing footsteps. I picked a direction, left, and started walking, my boots echoing softly on the damp concrete. The corridor was narrow, just wide enough for one person. Pipes lined the ceiling, and every few feet there was a door, each labeled with a number or an abbreviation that didn't mean anything to me. Most were shut tight. A few hung slightly ajar, but inside was nothing, just empty rooms, long abandoned. Peeling paint. Rusted beds. A desk or two. It didn't feel like a military installation. Not exactly. Too small. Too personal. Like it had been made for a handful of people. A family, maybe? Or something worse, a project. I came to a junction where the hallway split 3 ways. Right away I noticed the sound. It wasn't a voice this time. It was humming. A low, rhythmic vibration. Faint, but definitely real. Almost like the drone of an old generator buried deep in the walls. I followed it. The sound led me down a sloping corridor, deeper into the earth. The walls here looked different. Newer. Less rust, more concrete. Like someone had expanded the place at some point. It was colder, too, far colder than it should have been. My fingers were stiff, and I could see my own breath. That's when I passed another message, this one smeared in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. "It can't leave if you don't speak." I stopped. A chill settled into my spine like a weight. Suddenly, behind me, barely audible, I heard it again. "Hey!" A voice. Male. Raspy. Right behind my ear. I spun around, flashlight flaring against the wall. Nothing. "Who's there?" I called. My voice sounded wrong in the space. Like it was being swallowed up. Silence again. Then, farther down the hall. "Down here, please. I'm cold." I gritted my teeth and forced myself forward. The hallway ended in a large steel door, slightly open, the edges smeared with dark fingerprints. A single red light glowed above it. I pushed it open. Inside was a room lined with old monitors, dozens of them, most cracked or dead. In the center was a chair. And in that chair, a man. Thin. Pale. Wearing rags. He looked up at me with wide, sunken eyes. "Don't talk," he whispered hoarsely. "Don't ask me anything." Then he pointed to the far wall. There was a mirror there, one of those one-way panels they use in interrogation rooms. Only this one? It was breathing. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, my flashlight beam catching dust, maybe. But no, the mirror was expanding and contracting like lungs. Slow. Wet. Rhythmic. The man in the chair didn't move, didn't blink. He just kept pointing at it with a trembling hand. "Don't talk to it," he whispered again, more urgently. "That's how it gets in." I stepped forward without realizing it, drawn toward the glass. My light flickered as I neared, and for a second I thought it was dying. But then I realized, no, it wasn't the flashlight. The room itself dimmed, like something was feeding off the light. Behind the glass, there was movement. A shape shifted in the dark on the other side of the mirror. Human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall. Limbs too long. It moved with this jerky, animal twitch, like it didn't know how to wear a body properly. Then, slowly, it leaned toward the glass. Its head tilted sideways, unnatural and curious, and I saw my own reflection beside it. The thing was standing where I should have been. That's when I heard it. Not out loud, not like before. It spoke in my head. Not words at first. Just the feeling of a voice. A suggestion. Like someone breathing syllables straight into my brain. Every hair on my arm stood up. I staggered back, hand to my temple. The man in the chair stood suddenly. "Don't answer it," he shouted, his voice cracking. "God, don't think back." But it was too late. The thing behind the glass smiled, horribly, like it was learning, and then, in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, it said, "I knew you'd come down here." I backed away, heart hammering in my chest. The air was suddenly thick, like I was breathing syrup. My ears popped, and my skin felt stretched, like the pressure in the room had changed. The man grabbed my arm, nails digging in. "You need to go. You can still go. It only learns when you listen. That's how it grows." "What is it?" I choked out, despite every cell in my body screaming not to ask. He looked at me with dead eyes. "It's what's left over," he said. "From whatever this place was meant to hide. It's memory, twisted into form. It doesn't want to escape. It wants to be you." I looked back at the mirror. The thing was gone. But my reflection? It was still smiling. I tore my eyes from the glass and stumbled back into the hallway, lungs burning like I'd been underwater. My legs felt numb, like I was moving through glue. Behind me, the man didn't follow. I turned, but he was just standing there, back to the mirror, mumbling to himself, his fingers twitching at the edges of his sleeves. "I'm not me. I'm not me." It wore my voice. I let it in. I called out to him, but he didn't react. Just sat back down like he never stood up. I didn't know what else to do. I left him. The hallway was darker now, like the bunker itself was dimming. The weak emergency lights overhead flickered, casting long, stuttering shadows across the floor. My flashlight was the only thing that stayed constant, until it didn't. Right as I reached the junction where I'd entered, the light sputtered and went out completely. I smacked it against my palm, twisted the head. Nothing. Just black. I stood frozen in the dark for a long moment. That kind of darkness is hard to explain if you've never felt it. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the presence of something else. Like being watched from inside your own skin. Then, soft, right next to my ear, I heard it again. My voice. Whispering. "You didn't close the door behind you." I spun, raising the useless flashlight like a weapon. Breathing hard. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something, close. I forced myself forward, groping along the wall, feeling for any landmark, the bolt, the pipe, the scratched word. But everything felt wrong. Familiar shapes were in the wrong places, or gone entirely. It didn't make sense. I turned a corner I knew shouldn't be there. And then I saw it, the ladder. Thank God. The hatch. I rushed forward, heart lifting for the first time in what felt like hours. But when I climbed up and pushed on the hatch, it didn't budge. I shoved again. Harder. Nothing. It was sealed. No light leaked through the seams. No wind. No sound from the woods above. That's when I noticed the inside of the hatch looked different. Smooth. Seamless. The bolts were gone. The wheel gone. Like it had never been meant to open. That's when I heard a scraping sound from below me. From the hallway. Slow. Dragging. Like bare feet across concrete. I turned, eyes wide in the dark. And then, from the ladder itself, came a soft voice, just under my breath. "You went the wrong way." I dropped off the ladder fast, too fast, and landed hard on my ankle. Pain lanced up my leg, but adrenaline shoved it to the back of my mind. I swung the flashlight again, half hoping the batteries had fixed themselves through sheer panic. Still dead. The scraping sound had stopped. That was somehow worse. I crouched low, breathing shallow, ears straining in the dark. Nothing. Until a sharp metallic click echoed from behind me. Then again. Closer. Like someone tapping a coin against metal. I turned and saw the faintest orange glow pulsing at the far end of the corridor. Dim, like a dying ember. I limped toward it. The hallway narrowed as I moved forward, the ceiling closing in, the walls curving slightly inward like the bunker itself was contracting. The orange glow grew brighter, and then I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. The mirror. Not a mirror, exactly, but the same shape. The same size. Embedded in the wall. It was no longer glass. It looked like living tissue now, translucent skin stretched over bone, with a faint pulse behind it. Veins. Capillaries. Moving. Something alive. And worse, it showed me a reflection. Not of the corridor. Not of the glowing room. Of me. Standing outside in the clearing. Looking down at the open hatch. Only this version of me wasn't holding a flashlight. He was holding a knife. I blinked. He looked up. And smiled. I stumbled back in horror, the pain in my ankle screaming now. But I didn't care. I turned and bolted, limping down the hallway as fast as I could, not caring where I was going, just needing a way. The bunker shifted around me. I swear to God it moved. I turned a corner and ran straight into a wall that hadn't been there before. The walls were different, fresh concrete, not old. No rust. No mold. Like it had just been poured. And on that wall was a plaque. Engraved. Clean. Not scratched or painted. Experimental Site 7. Echo Containment Division. Property of Kalin Industries. Contain the voice. Preserve the pattern. Do not engage. Before I could even process it, the hallway lights came on. Dim, flickering fluorescence. A hum filled the air again, low and vibrating in my teeth. Somewhere ahead, I heard a door slam shut. Then footsteps. Not scraping. Running. Someone, or something, was coming straight toward me. The footsteps came fast, too fast. Unnatural. Like someone sprinting full speed but never out of breath. I couldn't see them yet, but the echo off the concrete walls made it sound like they were all around me. My body froze. Some primal part of me, the part that knew the difference between a branch snapping in the woods and something watching, just shut down. I couldn't run. I couldn't even breathe. Then they stopped. Silence. That was somehow worse. I slowly backed into the nearest room. The door was half-rotted, swollen with moisture. Inside, there were filing cabinets scattered across the floor and a dry erase board hanging by one corner. Paper littered the ground, most of it moldy and illegible, but one sheet stood out. Clean. Untouched by time. On it in crisp type. Subject, Echo Variant D. Status, active. Host unconfirmed. Avoid verbal engagement. Symptoms of infection, visual self-recognition error, vocal duplication, looping behaviors, false memory insertion. Should the subject initiate speech in your voice, cease communication immediately. I dropped the paper. My hands were shaking now. I didn't understand most of what I'd read, but I understood enough. That voice, the one that had whispered in my voice. The one behind the mirror. It was in here. And then, from right behind the door. You found it, didn't you? My voice. Exactly. Except, it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside the room. I spun. And there I was. Standing just inside the doorway, maybe 2 feet away. Same jacket. Same boots. Even the little tear on my jeans near the knee. Only the face was wrong. The smile was too wide. The eyes didn't blink. It was like someone had made me from memory, but not quite right. I thought you might try to run, it said, tilting its head. But it always ends the same. We always come back here. I grabbed the nearest object, a rusted metal rod, and held it up between us. It laughed. You think you're the first? It said, stepping forward. You think this place hasn't been telling this story 1,000 times, with 1,000 mouths? It raised its hand slowly, and when it did, the skin on its arm peeled, just unzipped, like clothes. Underneath, there were no bones. Just layers. Faces. Piled on top of each other like wet paper. Some were still moving. whispering. "Let us out. Don't listen. Make it stop." The thing lunged. I swung the rod and made contact, felt it crunch against flesh, but it didn't fall. It just laughed again, grabbing my wrist with freezing fingers. Then it leaned in, inches from my face. "You invited it in when you asked what it was. That's all it needs. Attention. Recognition." It brought its mouth to my ear. I didn't move. "Now it wears you too." I don't remember how I got away. 1 second, its fingers were wrapped around my wrist, its voice in my ear like a wet whisper through static, and the next, I was running again, heart punching through my ribs, the hallway spinning around me in impossible geometry. Doors appeared where walls used to be. Stairs that spiraled both up and down. I saw flashes of rooms I hadn't entered, barracks with bunk beds still made, a medical bay stained with black fluids, a mural on one wall of a man whose face had been erased. The bunker wasn't a structure. It was a memory palace. A labyrinth of loops and echoes and choices that had already been made long before I arrived. Eventually, I collapsed. Somewhere deep in the heart of it, I stumbled into a room and locked the door behind me. It was different than the others, dust-free, warm somehow. The lights buzzed overhead but didn't flicker. There was a table in the center with a reel-to-reel recorder still spinning. I sat on the cold floor, my back against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. That's when I heard the voice again. Not outside. Not inside my head. On the tape. I crawled over and hit play. A man's voice crackled through, shaking with fear. "Test 47. Subject D continues to show adaptation. Mirrors now active. It speaks in the voice of loved ones, known voices, self-voice. Infection occurs not through touch, but through acknowledgement. If you respond, if you believe it, it becomes real." There was a pause. A rustling sound. Then the voice continued, more frantic now. "I made a mistake. I asked it a question. Just one. It answered like my brother. Now I can't stop hearing him. Even when I'm alone. Even when I close my eyes." Another pause. "They told us to build this place to contain it. But you can't contain an idea. Not forever. Not when it remembers you. Not when it can tell your story better than you can." The tape ended with a metallic clunk. The lights in the room dimmed slightly, just enough for me to notice something I hadn't before, on the wall, behind the reel player. A series of Polaroids. Dozens of them. All different people, but every one taken in the same spot, standing outside, just beside the hatch. Some looked like hikers. A few wore military uniforms. One looked like a teenager in a hoodie. Different years, different times. All of them were staring at the camera with the same vacant expression. I leaned closer to the last one. It was me. Same clothes. Same face. Only in the photo, my eyes were missing. Just two dark voids. Black smudges where they should have been. And scrawled in marker at the bottom of the photo. Part of the pattern now. The photo slipped from my fingers and landed face up on the floor, my eyeless stubble staring back at me. I backed away, knees buckling, breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I needed to get out. Now. Whatever this thing was, this echo, this entity, it wasn't just in the bunker. It was the bunker. It had spread into the walls, into the loops of memory, into me. But part of me still believed I could leave. If I moved fast enough. Quiet enough. If I didn't listen. I retraced my steps, or tried to. But the layout had changed again. Every time I turned a corner, I ended up somewhere I didn't recognize. My ankle throbbed. My flashlight flickered like it wanted to give up too. At one point I passed a room filled with voices, hundreds of them, whispering in perfect unison behind a sealed steel door. Every one of them speaking in a different version of my voice. Some were screaming. Some were pleading. One was singing a lullaby I hadn't heard since I was a child. I didn't go in. Eventually, I reached what looked like a service tunnel, low ceilings, curved walls, wires running along the base. It felt older than the rest of the bunker, untouched. My flashlight revealed dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. Maybe decades. I followed it, heart pounding. 10 minutes in, I found another hatch. Smaller. Built into the wall instead of the ceiling. It had no wheel, no bolts, just a handle and a red tag hanging off it. The tag read, "Exit, forgotten. Do not open unless you're ready to be remembered." I stared at that message for a long time. What did it mean? Be remembered by who? Or what? But behind me, I heard the voice again, whispering now in every tone I'd ever spoken. My laugh. My scream. My whisper. My sob. "This place is only as real as your story," it said, overlapping layers of my voice, folding in on themselves. "And your story ends here." I pulled the hatch open. Cold air blasted my face. Blackness beyond, pure, perfect dark. But not like the bunker's dark. This was clean. Silent. Final. I hesitated only a moment. Then I crawled through. I don't know how long I was in there. I don't remember moving. Just a stretch of nothingness where I felt myself peeling away, thoughts first, then memories, then voice. And then light. Blinding, painful light. I was outside. On my back. In the clearing. The hatch beneath me. Closed. The trees above were swaying gently. Wind in my ears. A bird somewhere nearby. I scrambled to my feet, blinking hard, and looked around. Everything looked normal. Too normal. My backpack was gone. My flashlight gone. The map? Gone. And then I heard footsteps behind me. Crunching leaves. Slow. Measured. I turned. And saw a man. Wearing my clothes. Holding a flashlight. And smiling. I stood there, paralyzed, watching this other me approach. His steps were calm, casual. Like we were old friends meeting in a place either of us fully remembered. The closer he got, the more wrong he looked. The face was mine, but the eyes didn't move right. They twitched slightly, like they were trying to match where mine were looking but were always a fraction of a second behind. He stopped a few feet away. "I was hoping I'd make it out this time," he said, holding the flashlight loosely at his side. The voice was perfect. But I hadn't spoken yet. He tilted his head. "Funny thing about this place, you'd get used to the loop. You think if you just do it differently, maybe you can break it. Skip the questions. Avoid the mirror. Leave before the whisper comes." His smile widened. "But it always ends here. One of us walks away. One of us goes back in." I shook my head. "I made it out." He raised a hand. "That's what I said last time." Then he stepped forward and pressed something into my palm. A worn Polaroid. The one I'd seen inside. Me, standing at the hatch, eyes blacked out. My hand started shaking. The photo felt warm, like skin. And for a moment, just a second, I thought I saw it breathe. "I don't want to go back," I whispered. He nodded. "Neither did I. But someone has to hold the door. That's the cost." I looked back at the hatch. It was open. Just slightly. Something down there was waiting. "I don't understand what it wants." He leaned in. "It wants to be told. Again and again. It's not about escaping. It's about retelling. The moment you ask what it is, the moment you listen, you give it a face. A voice. Yours." He turned and began walking toward the woods. "What happens if I refuse?" I called out. He didn't stop. Then it grows confused. Hungry. It finds another way. Another voice. I looked down at the hatch again. A sound rose up from below. Not a scream. Not a whisper. My voice, telling the story I just lived, word for word, as if it was already starting over. I could have walked away. I almost did. But something inside me, some twisted, horrible empathy, told me that if I left that hatch open, it would keep going. It would find someone else. And maybe next time, it wouldn't ask permission. So I took the flashlight, stepped to the edge, and climbed back down. The metal creaked behind me. The hatch closed. And above, in the clearing, someone else found the map.